Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with your Alaska weather. As always, please visit our website at arh.noaa.gov, getting the updates to the forecast through that means, and you can also check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we have out for the state. Call our weather info line 1-800-472-0391, get updates to the forecast through that means as well, and you can follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. Starting off, we'll take a look at the warnings and advisories that we do have out for the state. We'll start with our blizzard warning here for eastern Turnagain Arm and Portage Valley. That starts in about an hour at 7 p.m. and tonight and goes through noon on Monday. Then up near Talkeetna, we have a winter weather advisory for snow that is west of the Parks Highway, and that starts midnight tonight and goes through midnight on Monday. Then way up along the eastern part of the Arctic coastline, we have wind chills advisories in effect. Those will take wind chills down to around minus 55, and those will be active through 9 p.m. tonight. So looking at what's happening now, we'll start off in the northern part of the state. We have high pressure up there, keeping all the cloud cover further to the south, but that's allowing for a lot more cooling, and why we're seeing those really cold temperatures all throughout the interior and up along the Arctic coastline. Watching this again, we'll look for our main low pressure system here by the eastern Aleutian Islands, and we can see the front getting pushed around with that, bringing up a lot of that cloud cover and moisture to the parts of the south central, southwest part of the state and places in the central and eastern Bering as well. And we'll watch again and we'll notice on the end of this front we have a new low starting to form there, coming up right there at the south. That's going to be another weather producer here in the next couple days. Then we'll watch the loop one last time out over the Bering Sea, and we'll see some of the lower cloud cover there starting to push in from the north, bringing a lot of precipitation to the western and central Aleutian Islands. So our weather for the remainder of today, we have some isolated snow showers out by the western Aleutians, but with our main low pressure system, warmer air coming up with that, we're seeing some rain for the Dutch Harbor area and out over the Alaska Peninsula, but pretty quickly turning back to snow for Bristol Bay, the Kuskokwim Delta, and out over the Pribilof Islands. And with stronger winds out ahead of this front, we're seeing some blowing snow conditions there, and even some blowing snow conditions out ahead of the precipitation with some of the snow that's on the ground just because of those stronger winds that are coming in through those areas. But up through the remainder of the interior and up along the Arctic coast, not seeing a whole lot of precipitation, just some stronger winds along the coastline leading to those wind chills. Then we do have in the south central that southerly flow bringing up all that moisture, bringing in some snow to the south central. Not quite enough to get the rain there yet, but we are going to see those blowing snow conditions start to develop for areas around Portage Valley and eastern Turnagain Arm, and then some isolated areas of snow shower primarily along the Gulf for the Panhandle. For tonight, snow going to be relegated to the northern parts of the Panhandle and along the North Gulf Coast. Warmer air still starting to push closer, but we're having that snow push more in towards the Alaska Range now with blowing snow conditions, not only in eastern Turnagain Arm, Portage Valley, but also towards Thompson Pass, and then on the southern parts of the interior with the loose snow on the ground up there. Other parts of the central and eastern interior, not going to see a whole lot of activity tonight, but as we get back to the western part of the state, our second low that was coming up from the south, bringing in a lot of rain to Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula, and then snow all the way along the west coast into the Norton Sound area, with blowing snow conditions all along the coastline out by the Pribilof Islands, and even places closer towards Ambler where there's no snow yet, but again, picking up that loose snow that's on the ground. Then some northerly flow out over the central and western Bering Sea, bringing in those showers to the central and western Aleutians. As we move into Monday, that flow is going to continue a little bit colder now, bringing the snow down into the central Aleutians, and a third low coming up from the south going to start to bring some rain to areas along the Alaska Peninsula. But for Monday, rain and snow mix there, with snow further to the north, blowing snow remaining for Monday for the Pribilof Islands, blowing snow conditions and new snowfall all the way up the west coast into the Kotzebue Sound area now, and some blowing snow conditions out by St. Lawrence Island. Our one low that's moving into the Gulf now, bringing in some warmer weather, some rain and snow now for the south central, extending out towards the Yakutat area, and now blowing snow conditions for all the loose snow throughout much of the interior into parts of the Brooks Range as well. But along the Arctic coastline, not enough to see any blowing snow conditions up there for Monday. On Tuesday, we're starting to see some rain come back into the southern places of the Panhandle, colder further to the north, rain and snow mix there. Rain and snow throughout the south central as well, and then snow throughout much of the interior. Now starting to see some blowing snow conditions on the very eastern parts of the Arctic coast. That low that we just saw moving up towards the Alaska Peninsula pushes into the eastern Bering Sea on Tuesday, bringing that rain and snow mix all the way through the YK Delta and Bristol Bay as well, but snow out ahead of it out towards the Seward Peninsula with some blowing snow conditions off by St. Lawrence Island. And then northerly flow continuing for the central and western Aleutian Islands, seeing some isolated snow showers out there on Tuesday. For temperatures, this afternoon we'll start off in the Panhandle, mid-30s for the most part, a little bit warmer further to the south. Some 30s along the coastline as we get towards the south central, but dropping down pretty quickly as we move to inland locations. -9 for both Eureka and Glen Allen. So we move into the interior, right around 0 in the south, getting below 0 pretty quickly as we get further up towards the north, -20 through the pass, and then in the -20s along the Arctic coastline for many locations. Barrow a little bit warmer there, -13, -11 for Kaktovik. And as we get down in the Kotzebue Sound area, negative teens there, negative single digits as we get down into the Norton Sound. And as we move back over the southwest part of the state, down into the single digits there. Colder on the northern part of the Bristol Bay area, right around 20 degrees, but into the mid and upper 30s as we get to the southern locations and down into the Alaska Peninsula. And then for the Aleutian Islands, going down from right around 40 down to around freezing as we get out towards the Shimia area. And then 22 for St. Paul and 27 for St. George this afternoon. Our lows for tonight going to stay right around freezing out in the western Aleutians, and going to continue that trend into the central Aleutians as well, getting up into the mid-30s, or down to the mid-30s for the Alaska Peninsula. Mid-20s for the Bristol Bay area, single digits as we get further to the north, below 0 in the Norton Sound, right around -20 for the Kotzebue Sound area, and staying in the -20s all the way along the Arctic coastline. And that's going to stretch now into the northern parts of the interior, and then down into the 20s for much of the south central, and down right around just below freezing for the Panhandle. Expected lows for tonight. Highs for tomorrow jumping back up into the 40s for the Panhandle. Similarly for the south central, right around 40 degrees there. Getting up to right around freezing for southern locations of the interior, and getting into the single digits for those northern locations. It's going to stay below 0 along the Arctic coastline, getting up into right around -10 up there. So go down the west coast of the state, getting above 0 for the Kotzebue Sound area, getting into the teens for the Norton Sound area, getting into the 20s for the YK Delta, and right around 40 degrees as we get into the Bristol Bay area. Right around 40 degrees in the eastern parts of the Aleutians, and then above freezing as we get out towards the Shimia area, with St. Paul getting up to 25 degrees for tomorrow. Going to our aviation forecast, widespread MVFR conditions throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. And with that southerly flow coming up towards the south central, we're going to see a lot of IFR conditions there, but primarily staying in the Alaska range and further to the south. And then some MVFR, IFR conditions along the west coast of the state and along the Arctic coastline. For tomorrow, for the passes, we have AKwx is going to be VFR as well as Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill will both be IFR throughout the day, as well as Rainy Pass and Windy will start off in VFR but drop down to those IFR conditions. Then Isabel Pass will be MVFR as well as Mintasta. And both Tanita and Portage will be IFR throughout the day. And then Chilkoot and White should remain VFR throughout the day tomorrow. For our freezing levels, we have some warmer air coming into the east with that southerly flow that we saw, bringing in those warmer conditions to the southern places of the Panhandle, but our surface freezing line staying right along the North Gulf Coast and then exiting out to the west over the southern part of the Bering Sea. For our icing, starting off to the west in the central Aleutian Islands area between 3,000 and 6,000 feet, getting up to between 6,000 and 10,000 feet as we get out over the Alaska Peninsula and places in the southwest, but dropping back down as we get further to the north between 1,000 and 5,000 feet there. Then out over the south central, the highest for the state between 8,000 and 12,000 feet. For our jet stream, with that southerly flow bringing in a lot of moisture, we have that southerly jet about 90 knots, then exiting out at a westerly direction, out 80 knots going out into Canada. And then our main part of our jet well south of the Aleutian Islands, 160 knots there. Down to 9,000 feet, we have our low over the eastern Aleutian Islands. Flow around that is bringing in some northerly flow, 25 to 35 knots out over much of the Bering Sea. And then our strongest flow coming in out of a southerly direction, getting up to as high as 70 knots over the south central, dropping down pretty quickly to around 35 knots going out into the northern locations, but quickly off to the east going down to 30 to 45 knots, and then out over the Panhandle, 35 knots coming in out of a southeasterly direction. Down at 3,000 feet, pretty similar flow out there, 15 to 30 knots, with the strongest being closer to the Gulf for the Panhandle. And then our strongest flow once again right over the south central, 65 knots there, dropping down to 45. But on either side of this stronger core of winds, down to 20 on the east, down to 15 on the west, and pretty low along the Arctic coastline to 25 to 30 knots out of a southerly direction there. And then flow around our low, we have coming in out of a northerly direction, 20 knots out west, getting up to as high as 40 knots as we get closer to the low in the central Aleutian Islands. These winds are going to bring in some turbulence starting off in the Aleutians. Central Aleutians below 4,000 feet, expecting some turbulence there. Some lighter areas of turbulence around the Alaska Peninsula. And then the strongest is going to be in the south central with those stronger winds that we saw below 6,000 feet expected there, extending out from the Cordova area out to the west and then up into the central and western parts of the interior below 4,000 feet there. And some lighter areas of turbulence just off the Gulf coastline for the Panhandle below 5,000 feet expected. And if you stay with us, we'll be back shortly with the marine forecast.
Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm Jim Peranto. Today I have the pleasure of talking with Jill Fredston, who is the co-director of the Alaska Mountain Safety Center. And today we're going to be talking about the threat avalanches pose to mountain travelers up here in Alaska and how one can better educate oneself when traveling in avalanche-prone areas. Welcome, Jill.
Hi.
What conditions do you need to have for avalanches?
Well, the good news about avalanches is they only happen in certain times and certain places. So there's only 3 variables that make avalanches possible. That's terrain, weather, and snowpack. If you're going to talk about avalanche hazard, then you have to introduce a 4th variable, and that's us. So the first question, the thing that's the foundation for avalanches, is terrain. Is the terrain capable of producing an avalanche? And avalanches only happen on certain slope angles, generally from about 25 degrees and up. 35 to 45 is prime time. It doesn't mean that you have to be on a steep slope to get caught in an avalanche. You can be on a flat surface as long as it's hooked to a steeper slope. And the slopes don't have to be big. About 50% of all the avalanche accidents that happen in this country happen on slopes that are less than 300 feet high. So we've had people caught on slopes that are only 15, 20, 36 feet high. Okay. The next question is snowpack. Could the snow slide? And the layers are constantly changing throughout the winter. And what we're looking for essentially is the combination of strong and weak layers. The snowpack can only adjust to a certain amount of stress and only at a certain rate of speed. So often when we get rapid, intense loading, a big snowstorm that comes in, that's too much for the snowpack to be able to adjust to that. So it's a constant balance between stress and strength. And weather is kind of the architect of avalanches. It's the thing that often creates the avalanche conditions. And the big three weather factors are precip, you know, how much snow or rain you're getting, wind, and temperature.
So where does Alaska rank in the country as far as avalanche risk?
Well, avalanches affect our transportation corridors, they affect the places we like to play, they affect the houses we live in. So avalanches are very intrinsic to Alaska. In terms of accidents, we lead the nation per capita in avalanche fatalities, and we're very close to leading the nation in absolute numbers of fatalities since 92, 93. We're, I think, 2 fatalities behind Colorado right now. We keep swapping the leads, and that's a pretty staggering statistic if you think about it, because our population is so much lower.
Now, how many avalanches on average would you say per year up here in Alaska do we have?
Well, every year we have thousands of avalanches. Most of them we don't care about if they don't hit the power line or don't hit the road or don't catch somebody.
There's no people there to actually experience them.
I mean, really, avalanches become about us and where we put ourselves, where we choose to work and play. But we have anywhere usually between 3 and 13 fatalities in a year. I'd say 3, 4, 5 is about the average. But there may be over 100 people that get caught. You just might not hear about that. They get caught. They maybe are partly buried, but just aren't killed in those slides.
So tell us about the Alaska Mountain Safety Center. What do you guys provide?
Well, the Alaska Mountain Safety Center is a nonprofit organization that Doug Fessler and I set up in 1986. I used to run the state's Alaska Avalanche Forecast Center when they had one, and Doug ran the other half of the state avalanche safety program. And when that ended, we set up the Alaska Mountain Safety Center. And we do a lot of consulting for power line companies, mining companies, assessing the hazard, designing defenses, doing operational avalanche forecasting and helicopter bombing. And then we do a lot of teaching, because really nobody needs to get caught in a slide. You see the same accidents happening over and over and over again.
Now, is there a avalanche forecast center up here now?
There is no forecast center, although every year there's there's maneuvering for funds. Maybe the funds will come through. Senator Stevens is working on it now. There is forecasting out of the Forest Service for Turnagain Pass, and you can access those forecasts on the web.
Now, I understand that there is an outgrowth to the center, the Alaska Avalanche School. So what are they doing?
Doug started the Alaska Avalanche School in 1977, and then he ran it as a state program until '86. Then we ran it under the Alaska Mountain Safety Center, and it's the leading education service in this state for, you're a backcountry traveler, you want to learn how to evaluate hazard, that's where you go, and you get hands-on training. Just this year, we passed it off to our longtime instructors, and they're operating it as a separate nonprofit called the Alaska Avalanche School.
I was on their website about a week ago, and I came across a fund that they had set up. I believe it's called the Avalanche Education and Scholarship Fund. What's that?
It's a fund that I started in '88 when a friend of mine was killed in Turnagain Pass, and it provides about 5, depends on funds, but usually about 5 partial scholarships a year. And the idea is to get people to go to workshops who might not otherwise be able to attend.
That's great. So if I'm a mountain traveler, okay, I'm going to go out in an avalanche-prone area, what's the most important thing that I need to know before I go out there, in your opinion?
It's always hard to boil things down to the most important.
Right.
But the most important thing you need to know is that you need to go out there thinking on the mountain's terms and not on your own terms. The clues are always there, and it's a matter that we either ignore the clues or we don't see them. Once in a while, people just don't know. They just don't have the education. But most of the time when I go to an accident, people say, oh yeah, I saw that there were avalanches on similar slopes. Oh, I heard the snow go whoomph. I heard it collapse. I knew it just snowed 2 feet overnight. I knew it snowed like crazy. I saw that the wind had really blown. And those are the clues that we need to pay attention to. So one is picking up on the clues, and the other one is learning to travel safely. You can travel through very potentially hazardous terrain and do it in smarter ways. For example, snow machiners, an awful lot of these accidents are happening when we're high marking. We're climbing up the slope, turning, and coming down. If snow machiners would high mark one at a time and not park at the bottom of steep slopes while someone's high marking up above, we would cut the fatalities by 1/3 and maybe even by half.
Wow. Now, as an aside to all the avalanche expertise that you provide, you're also an avid rower and a writer, and you have a new book coming out. So why don't you tell us about that?
The new book is going to be called Snowstruck. It's about avalanches. It will come out next fall of 2005. And unlike Snow Sense, which is a little technical book about avalanches, this is really a much broader take on avalanches. This is why we allow ourselves to get caught as people, and how we learn about avalanches, and kind of the cumulative effect of dealing with avalanches over time. And it takes place mostly in Alaska, but it ranges around the world as well.
And I also have this book. This was another book that you wrote, Rowing to Latitude, and fascinating stories about you rowing in the frigid Arctic waters with your husband, Doug. I believe I actually even won an award.
It did.
I have another book here. We want to explain this to the viewers out there?
Well, Snow Sense, you know, if somebody's trying to get a handle on just what information matters when you're out in the backcountry, because you're bombarded with all of this information, Snow Sense is a good place to start. It kind of boils it down and takes terrain, weather, snowpack, and human factors, and looks at the real bullseye, the real critical information.
Okay. Yeah, and this can be found?
It's in any of the bookstores or REI, any of the outdoor stores.
All right, great. Well, thank you for coming on in today, taking time out of your busy schedule.
Thank you very much.
And folks out there, if you want to find out more information about avalanches, there's a good website to check out. It's called avalanche.org, and there's a lot of information that you can find about avalanches, and you can get centers across the, I think across the entire world, and also resources can be found at that website. You can also contact the Alaska Mountain Safety Center by either giving them a phone call or sending them a letter, and we'll be posting that address and phone number on the screen. Thank you again for coming on in, Jill.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us here on Alaska Weather Facts. Until next time.
Welcome back. We'll start off with a quick look at the ice edge. Out over the central Bering Sea, we are seeing some of the northerly flow extend that ice edge out there. But as we move out over Bristol Bay area, expecting that to start to diminish as we have some of the warmer air come up from the south. And similarly out over Cook Inlet, warmer air coming in from the south, expecting that ice to retreat some over the next couple days. For the rest of the marine forecast, starting off in the southeasterly flow, 25 knots in the south, picking up to as high as 35 knots as we get further to the north, and then flow in the inside waters, a southeasterly direction further to the south, 25 knots there. As we get into the central areas, we do start off northeasterly, becoming southeasterly in the afternoon, around 25 knots there, and then northerly flow north of Juneau, around 20 knots. For Tuesday, flow becoming more easterly out over the Gulf, around 20 knots there. Seas anywhere from 11 to 14 feet. Then the inside waters, southeasterly flow in the south, 15 knots there, and more northerly flow as we get up further to the north, around 15 to 20 knots. Then for Monday in the south central, in the inside waters here, northeasterly flow, 30 to 35 knots, weakening as we get closer to Shelikof Strait, only around 15 knots there, and then southeasterly flow out over the Gulf, getting up to as high as 40 knots as we get closer to the Seward area. And then 50 knots storm force as we get out closer towards south of Cordova, and then in the Prince William Sound itself, 45 knots out of an easterly direction. For Tuesday, things lightening up, becoming more easterly and northeasterly as we get further to the north there, 10 to 15 knots, up to as high as 30 knots closer to Kodiak Island, and then in the inside waters, staying northeasterly there, but only around 10 to 20 knots in Cook Inlet area, and up to around 25 knots as we get further to the south. For Monday for the Alaska Peninsula on the Pacific side, 30 to 40 knots out of a southerly direction, becoming more easterly in the Bering side, around 25 knots there. Seas 13 to 14 feet in the Pacific. Then on Tuesday, all flow becoming more southeasterly to easterly, 35 knots on the Pacific side, seas 15 to 18 feet. 30 knots as we get into the Bering side, 4 to 8 feet for seas there. Then for the Aleutian Islands, primarily northerly flow, pretty strong 35 to 40 knots. With the exception right around our low pressure center, we do have some southeasterly flow there, around 20 knots, seas only around 10 feet there. Higher as we get further off towards the central Aleutian Islands, around 18 feet on the Bering side, and then dropping down to around 13 feet by Shemya. Then on Tuesday, flow still staying primarily out of a northerly direction, a little bit weaker by Shemya, only around 30 knots, but picking up to around 40 knots over the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, with the exception again way out by our low pressure system, southerly flow around 20 knots there. For the west coast of the state, primarily northerly flow, 25 to 35 knots, with the strongest being further to the south by the Pribilof Islands, and freezing spray expected in all of the ice-free areas. Seas 5 to 14 feet, strongest or highest as we get further to the south. Then on Tuesday, still primarily that northerly flow, 25 knots further to the north, getting up to as high as 40 knots by the Pribilof Islands. With the exception of south of Nunavik Island, we do have some southeasterly flow there, 35 knots, and again freezing spray in those ice-free areas. Along the Arctic coastline, easterly flow around 15 knots along the Arctic coast, and as we get to the western part of the state, 10 to 15 knots there. Then on Tuesday, becoming more northerly there, 10 to 20 knots, and maintaining that easterly direction as along the Arctic coastline, 25 to 35 knots as we get further off to the east. Quick recap out over the state. We have a secondary low pressure system coming up from the south, bringing in some rain to Kodiak Island, going around our main low pressure system that is out over the eastern Aleutian Islands. But out ahead of these, a lot of that southerly flow bringing in snow throughout the Pribilof Islands, southwest part of the state, up into the Norton Sound area, expecting blowing snow conditions through all of those locations as well. Even some blowing snow, even though no new snowfall along the Ambler area. And then in the southern part of the interior as well, some blowing snow conditions with the loose snow that's on the ground. And then snow and blowing snow throughout the south central, especially through the passes. We have a blizzard warning going out from 7 p.m. this evening until noon tomorrow for the eastern Turnagain Arm and Portage Valley areas. Then down as we get into the northern parts of the Panhandle, some snow out there as well. As we move into Monday, continuing that southerly flow, starting to transition over that snow to some rain as well, except for the Copper River Basin, which is going to stay all snow. Then in the interior, we're going to have some stronger winds moving through, picking up the loose snow throughout many of the locations up into the Brooks Range as well. Then all along the Arctic, or the western coast of the state, we do have snow and blowing snow conditions extending down into the YK Delta and out over the Pribilofs, with the southerly flow over the Panhandle, or the Alaska Peninsula, bringing us rain and snow, and then some snow showers out over the central and western Aleutian Islands. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us tonight.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.